Have you ever felt like life is just passing you by? You wake up late, you scroll on your phone, maybe you pour yourself a coffee or make yourself a latte, and you tell yourself, I'll get to it later. The morning routine, the workout, the journaling, the meditation, the breath work, but later never ever seems to actually happen. Instead, the day sort of slips into procrastination. Video games, texting, doom scrolling through social media, watching porn, small distractions, until the evening arrives and once again you're left asking yourself, what have I actually done today? What am I doing with my life? You know you're capable. You know you could. You know you're talented, but somehow you never seem to quite commit. This is what Carl Jung calls the Puer Aeternus, the eternal child, the part of you that never really wants to grow up. It shirks responsibility, it rejects any type of confrontation or challenge, and when real accountability and responsibility comes knocking at your door, you huddle, you collapse, you freeze, you reject, you disconnect, you run away. And unless you start to understand it, it can keep you trapped in a kind of cycle of longing, nostalgia, and wasted potential. Today, we're going to break down the archetype of the Puer Aeternus, of the eternal child, of the man-child, using Jung's own words and concept, and a little bit of Marie-Louise von Franz and her work, hard to say that for some reason today, and the powerful myths and stories that can help you break free from this. Because the truth is, I've worked with so many men who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s over the last decade that have said the same thing. I still feel like a helpless kid. I'm still acting like a petulant child. And so if you're ready to break free from this lack of accountability and responsibility, if you're ready to break free from the sabotage that coincides with never really stepping into the potential that you can feel and know is in your gut, then follow me on this journey. So let's start with Jung and the eternal child. The Puer Aeternus literally means eternal boy. It's one of Jung's maybe most well-known archetypes outside of the shadow and then outside of the anima and the animus, but he often described it as a fixation on youth, on potential, on possibility, and oftentimes at the expense of responsibility and reality. So we trade these things in. When we are stuck in this archetype, when you're stuck in this archetype of the eternal boy, you want the things of your youth. You want to be able to eat whatever you want, do whatever you want, smoke whatever you want, play whatever video games you want. There's a kind of desire to have eternal freedom, unshackled, unburdened by absolutely anything. So things like job, success, finances, money, health, family, all of these types of things can seem like a burden that you are having to take on that is somehow crushing your sense of freedom. And a lot of the times what happens with the eternal boy is that he sees external circumstances as the result for his failures. There are external forces that are causing him to not attain his potential, to not achieve the possibility that he knows he's capable of. And Jung wrote that those who are caught in the Puer Aeternus archetype, those whose psyches are really enamored with it, lead a kind of provisional life, one that never fully commits to anything. One that never fully commits to anything. Now, I get this archetype because I definitely used to be caught in this archetype. I didn't want to commit to anything. I didn't want to commit to jobs. I didn't want to commit to careers. I didn't want to commit to one idea that I could, build and create in the world. But Jung says that the Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy, they live the provisional life, which means that for the time being, one is not yet anything definite. They are only a spectator. They are only a spectator. So any experience is ghost-like, abstract, without trace of realization. And this is the real kicker, because in other words, the eternal boy prefers fantasy over reality. The eternal boy chooses to live in a fantasy world. This is what I've called in finance the lottery mindset. Maybe one day I'll hit it big, or I'll have this big idea and I'll strike gold on something and I'll make millions. They would rather dream about becoming a writer, an entrepreneur, a great athlete, an artist, whatever it is. It causes you to dream about the things that you want to do and become, rather than risk the possible humiliation of actually trying and perhaps failing. So Marie-Louise von Franz said, she was one of Jung's closest collaborators. She expanded on this archetype quite a bit in her book. She actually wrote a book about it called Puer Aeternus. And she describes this archetype as someone with great imagination, great talent, but somebody who refuses, and this is her words, somebody who refuses to grow up, because growing up means accepting limitations, mortality, and imperfections. She pointed out that the puer, that the eternal boy, often sees the ordinary demands of life, of work, of commitment, of responsibility as beneath them, as somehow inherently something that they should avoid or reject. Better to stay on the mountaintop of the fantasy and the possibility of what could happen than to descend into the valley of reality. Because in reality, as Jung talked about, there's hard work. There is possible failure. So the myths, this is the next section. We're going to talk about the myths of the eternal child, of which there are many. Some of them you have probably known. But to really understand this myth, Jung turned to understand this archetype, Jung would often turn to mythology. And what we can look at first is Icarus. And Icarus was the boy that flew too close to the sun, right? He was gifted wings. He was given the possibility of freedom, but he refused to respect any limits and limitations. And his fall is really the story of the Puer Aeternus, who confuses potential with immortality. He confuses his potential with this kind of infallibility. Nothing can ever happen to me. Nothing will ever go wrong. I can fly as high as I want. And so Icarus would don these wings that he was gifted, and he would, as we all know, he would fly up too close to the sun in a kind of arrogance that he should be able to get away with anything. The next myth is obviously Peter Pan. Honestly, one of the most iconic archetypes and portrayals of the Puer Aeternus. And Peter Pan, he refuses to grow up, and he lives in a place called Neverland. And Neverland literally is the sort of archetypal or symbolic embodiment of a fantasy where a child never has to grow up. And what does that come along with? It comes along with never having to take on any type of responsibility, any type of accountability. Peter Pan is sort of left to his own devices. And sure, there's the interesting thing about Peter Pan is that he's in a war. Who's in a war with? An adult. He's in a war with an evil adult man. Now, that man happens to be Captain Hook. And, he seems like a bit of a clown, obviously, because he's portraying the villain in the story. The villain that is almost challenging Peter Pan to take some responsibility. And if you've ever seen the Disney movie, there's the final fight where Hook almost gets Pan by forcing him to not fly away. And he sort of goads him into this conflict and this battle that is a little bit more on even terms. So these are some myths that kind of portray it. And you can see in the mythology the core tenets of what goes into this archetype, of what goes into being this boy. That you might think for yourself as a man, what does this have to do with me? Well, look at your life and look at where you are rejecting responsibility, where you are shirking any kind of accountability, where you see the real possibility in your life and you're not acting on it because it would mean you actually have to step out of this boy-like way of being, that you have to face confrontation, challenge, failure. You have to face getting things wrong. You have to face not carrying the responsibility well. And this brings us to the next part, which is the natural seduction of youth. The natural seduction of youth. You see, the eternal boy is actually quite seductive, and it's quite prominent in our modern culture. We can see this in a lot of men. I see this personally in a lot of men that I've worked with who are refusing to step into their potential, who are refusing to step into their possibility because they don't want to take on responsibility. They want the possibility to be and the potential to be actualized without actually having to do anything. So part of what makes youth so seductive is the natural nostalgia that comes along with it. There's a kind of whimsy and awe that is inherent in childhood. And Jung said that the youth holds a special kind of numinous quality. And if you've been around a kid, you can feel this, right? You can feel the numinous quality that Jung is talking about because there's almost something magical and ethereal and whimsical and awe-invoking about it because it represents this sort of pure potentiality of the human experience, of the human psyche, of the world. The first kiss, the first adventure, the first creative spark where you build something, the first time you get to camp outside and see the stars. These things hold a tremendous amount of meaning in our psyche because they carry such an imprint on who we are. Now, von Franz added that many Puer types were gifted children. And in her research, she sort of found that they were oftentimes praised for their talent, for their intelligence, for their creativity very, very early on. And as a result, they built their identity on being exceptional, And so reality feels threatening because reality, as we all know, eventually humbles everyone. And so what happens is that a lot of these types of men, and maybe you are one of them that's watching them, and this is no slight on you, because like I said, I was one of them, they were praised for certain attributes growing up. And those attributes never actually actualized. They never actualized into anything of substance because that child knows that in order to actualize the potential, they have to leave the territory and the island of childhood. As Jung put it, to be always about to live, to sacrifice the present for the future. This is the hallmark of the Puer Aeternus. Always about to live, sacrificing the present for the future. So they're not actually present. This is one of the challenges with being in the eternal boy, being caught by this archetype, is that you're not really present in your life. You are chronically thinking about the possibility, the potential, the things that could happen, what you could create, what you could do, and none of it actually comes to fruition. The shadow here, of course, because every archetype has a shadow, the shadow is that it appears, the eternal boy appears charming, creative, full of ideas, but they are also very restless, very inconsistent, often unreliable. And the relationships often suffer as a result of this. No one is ever quite good enough. When intimacy feels too real or too close, they find a way to escape, or they collapse the relationship by not taking on responsibility in the relationship and shirking it to the other person, chronically forcing the other person to be the adult in the relationship. And for a lot of men, it creates a mothering dynamic where they feel like they are in a relationship with their mom. And Jung noted, and this is kind of an interesting one, that the Puer often forms a kind of secret alliance with death. In his collected works, in Jung's collected works, he observed that some eternal children live with a subtle death wish because reality feels too confronting. And again, you can see this in the story of Peter Pan, He is constantly doing things that is putting him into the sort of target, the sights of death. He's constantly putting himself into a position where he could die, or one of the lost boys could die, or one of the other kids could die. And so there's this pull sometimes for the Puer Aeternus, for the eternal boy in you, to use things like drugs and get hooked on anything that's adrenaline-based, endless escapism through things like video games or weed. And these often accompany the Puer Aeternus, the eternal boy, because they help to mask the deeper fear inside of you, which is the fear of actually maturing, the fear of maturation, the fear of growing up and stepping into a kind of responsibility and accountability. And for many people, it's going to be perceived as a burden to step into a burden that will actually help them to grow. So what do you do with this archetype? How do you actually work with it in a way where you can create change? The first step, and there's many different ways to work on this, right? Jung would work on this with creative outlets like painting and drawing, writing, creative writing, but also with real life action. So I'm going to break down 5 things that you can do to start to break out of this eternal boy complex that's inside of you and start to mature as a man. So the first thing is to accept the limitation, accept limitations in life. Von Franz said the cure for the puer is to accept the small tasks of life, the limitations of life, body, and mortality. This helps to bring you into direct contact with reality. It takes you out of the fantasy land, that there's no limitations, that everything's endless and everything can be totally fine. You never have to worry, and whatever it is that your mind sometimes tell you. So come into contact with the limitations and the reality of your life. This means taking on real responsibilities that genuinely do not feel glamorous, right? I don't like paying my taxes. I don't like doing accounting. I don't like a lot of things that I have to do within my business and my daily life as a man, but it is part of helping me make contact with the limitations of my life, paying bills, getting a job that feels challenging, right? I worked construction for years. I did door-to-door sales. There's so many things that I did that helped me to break free from this kind of fantasy-based mentality, caring for other people, taking care of them. The next thing, after you start to accept your limitations, and so what I would like for you to do as a challenge is to look at the real limitations and responsibility that you can take on in your life today and tomorrow. What small tasks and actions have you been avoiding that you know would help you to feel more responsible, more capable, more aligned with your potential? It might be as simple as finally finishing off your resume. It might be as simple as, putting a down payment on something. It might be as simple as paying a bill that's been sitting on your table for so long, or writing the email that you've been avoiding. Take some small actions and do them today and tomorrow. Number 2, today and tomorrow, not today or tomorrow. Do not wait. Number 2 is embrace the ordinary, right? Jung believed that the true individuation requires engaging with the world as it is and not escaping from it. And things that the Puer Aeternus and the eternal boy really struggle with is that he's constantly living in fantasy land. He's never really present to the small, banal, and mundane things that actually make up reality. Doing the laundry, being present for it, riding on the bus, going out for dinner and just being present in a conversation with your spouse or your girlfriend or a loved one. These things are going to help pull you into reality and to be present with them. They are kind of the crucible where character is forged. So my challenge for you on this part is to go and find ordinary things to do. Go and take on some responsibility. Volunteer somewhere. Ride the bus somewhere. do nothing but fold your laundry. Don't listen to a podcast. Don't listen to, and just get your laundry done. Actually fold it maybe. Maybe you're the type of guy that just like throws it into his drawer like I was in my early 20s, which carried into my early 30s, and I finally got that together. But maybe do your laundry and fold your laundry. Those types of things, embracing the ordinary, can be very, very helpful. Number 3 is facing failure. Part of the Puer Aeternus is that he does not want to face the inherent failure of life. He avoids this failure because he fears it. It is one of his deepest fears. He does not want to fail at anything, and so he lives in fantasy land so that he never actually has to try. But Jung reminds us that the way is not without error and stumbling. The way is not without error and stumbling. Integration requires risking humiliation, writing the book that might flop, asking for the raise, applying for the job, asking the girl out. All of those types of things you have to start to face. So I want you to choose one thing that you are afraid to fail at, and I want you to do some exposure therapy. And what that means is that you're going to choose one thing to do for a day or two, right? Where you're going to ask a woman out, or you're going to send your CV, your resume, to 5 different job postings, or you're finally going to decide to ask for the raise. Whatever it is, you're going to do one thing that you are afraid to fail at. It might be sending an email, making a phone call, asking for the sale, whatever it is, but do one thing that you know you're afraid to fail at. Number 4 is commit to the process, not the fantasy. Realize that this fantasy is going to want to continue to pull you back in. And they noted that the Puer really loves the idea of beginnings, but hates the grind of the journey. The eternal boy loves this notion of like, let's start this thing and this new thing, and I'll start that new job and maybe this new business. And I see this all the time with men that want to be entrepreneurs. They chronically jump between different ideas. And that is a sign that you're stuck in this sort of Puer Aeternus, this eternal boy mentality. I want to begin things, but I don't want to do the really hard work to make it come to fruition. I know so many men whose lives are crippled by this. They're literally crippled by this. And they start things. They start to create a business. They start to apply for a job. They start to get in shape. They start to make a little bit more money and invest it. And then when the real work starts to set in, they peace out. They bounce. They are gone. They don't do it anymore, and they start to retreat into fantasy. So commit to the process. Commit to the ongoing, I was going to say grind, but commit to the ongoing unfolding of the journey versus the fantasy of, oh, what happens when I hit it big, when this product that I've created is, suddenly making millions. Don't worry about that. That happens when you commit to the process, okay? That's what happens when you commit to the process. The last thing is seek a mentor, okay? Seek a mentor. In the myths, the eternal child often grows only through guidance. Okay, this is super important. The eternal child, the Puer Aeternus, this archetype. And it doesn't matter how old you are. I've worked with men who are in their 60s who are captured by this, and in their 50s and their 40s that are captured by this archetype. But the eternal child only grows through guidance, right? Peter Pan needs this. Horus in the Egyptian lore needs this. And it's just something that you have to confront. The eternal boy oftentimes has some type of rupture with the father or with men in general. And so part of the work to undo the Puer Aeternus is to actually find a mentor through therapy, through community, through traditional mentorship that can provide accountability and grounding so that you can continue to confront that which you are afraid of. And that is the muscle, oftentimes, that you as the eternal boy or this part of you really lacks. It lacks the ongoing accountability and grounding to continue to move forward. So On that note, very quickly, definitely I would recommend checking out the Man Talks Alliance. There's a link in the comments below. We have the opening. The doors are opening at the end of September. We've got about 800 guys in there from all over the world, and they all support you in being accountable. I support you in being accountable. We have pathways, programs, courses for you to do. And there is it really is becoming the number one place for you as a man to do your personal development, your therapeutic development. So click the link, sign up for the wait list. When doors open, I hope to see you inside. With all that said, the eternal boy, how you shift from the eternal boy to the integrated man is first off by realizing that this eternal boy, this Puer Aeternus, is not your enemy. It really is your creative fire. But when it calls the shots, when it rules your life, it keeps you suspended in possibility. It keeps your potential at bay, forever afraid of reality. It would be like allowing my 4-year-old boy to call the shots of our life, right? We would have pizza and mac and cheese every single night, which actually sounds amazing, right? I love that idea, but it's not realistic. So Jung taught that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. And if you remain the eternal child, you risk passing that burden on to your children. So if you want kids or you have kids, all the more reason to start this work. To live fully means to accept both the potential and the limitations of one's existence. One of the main things you really have to do, and this is one of the things that I had to do, which was very challenging, was be brutally honest and get feedback about your capacity, your competency, and the areas that you wanted to grow. I remember that I wanted to start a business at one point, and I didn't know anything about business. And I needed to get very specific feedback from people who could grade my talents in how I worked with men, in how I deployed therapeutic and coaching modalities. And it was tough because at first I wanted to be better than I actually was. I lived in this fantasy land that I was so much better and so much more gifted than I actually was. And I sought out real feedback and real mentorship from men that I deeply, deeply respected as practitioners. And it was so humbling and it was so carving of my character that it turned me into a completely different person because I started to connect with the reality of who I was and what I was capable of. And from there, I could build a path. From there, I could unleash potential. But living in the fantasy of one day never allows the potential to arrive. So don't forget to mend this episode forward. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe on YouTube, on Spotify, on whatever it is, on Apple Podcasts. And until next week, Connor Beaton signing off.